I am Matt Stanislav. For those of you that don't know me, I am a financial advisor with Edward Jones and also a member of the Business Bootcamp Committee. So thank you guys so much for coming today. We're excited to have you here. This is the fifth installment of our 2017 series, and this is a place where not only do we provide you with the professional skills to thrive in your workplace, but we also provide you the opportunity to network. So we're excited for you guys to be here today and share some good information with you. Before I introduce our host, I do want to mention a couple opportunities that we have. First off, the opportunity that we have is to be able to sponsor one of these events. When you come, the food that you get is the cost of sponsorship. So the people that are up here every month have paid for the food, and that's all it costs for you to do that. And you get some great kickbacks as a result of it. So you get mentioned in the Chamber's Tuesday talk that goes out. You get put on their social media sites, and you also have the opportunity to come in front, introduce yourself and your business, and if you want, provide some promotional items to give away. The other opportunity that we have is that we are looking for a couple additional members for our committee. It meets once a month. We review the surveys that people fill out from the event, as well as start planning for the next month's events or in future months as well. So if you have any interest in being a part of the future of this group and either being involved in the way of a sponsorship or being a committee member, please let either one of the committee members know or Crystal from the Chamber, and we'd be glad to get you some more information. So with that, I'd like to introduce our host. And Chris, if you want to come up. So Chris Kappas is here from Cabela's, the world's foremost outfitter, and she gets to share a little bit about the business. Thank you, Chris.
All right, thanks. I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I've actually been with Cabela's for 19 years. I helped open the store 19 years ago as a customer service lead, and I was that for 16 years. Then I went to a product training specialist, and what that entailed is training my outfitters, working with vendors, and working with the customers as well, doing product demonstrations for them on special events. This is my second year as the marketing specialist, and what I do is, again, still working with the vendors from all over the country, working with the community as well, a lot of conservation groups, Pheasants Forever, NWTF, things like that. We do their banquets. One of the best things about my job is I get to travel. So we just got back from the Minnesota Governor's Fishing Opener in St. Cloud. So I got to fish, and I did catch one. So I was happy I didn't get skunked. And then we'll be going up to Grand Rapids for the Governor's Deer Opener, and then out to Marshall for the Pheasant Opener. And I work with our store in Rogers and Woodbury for those as well. So it's not entirely up to me. I do have my two cohorts that I work with up there. Our store in East Grand Forks, they also come down to work on the events as well. A couple of things that I wanted to just mention that I don't think a lot of people are aware of. Cabela's has what we call the Outdoor Fund. So if you're out there and they'll ask you if you want to round up to the nearest dollar, what that fund goes for is conservation groups, advocacy groups, youth education. So with the advocacy is making sure that our rights are protected, making sure working with different groups like that, and protecting the outdoor lifestyle. That's one of the biggest things that we're changing to make sure that our outdoor activities, getting kids off of Xboxes and getting them outside. Then we have the education, again, teaching the next generation for hunting, fishing, just being outside, camping, whatever we can do. Then we have a conservation, improving the habitat, with sound conservation methods, ensuring future generations for hunting and fishing. And then also they have one, it's called Helping Others. So we're getting disabled folks out there experiencing fishing and hunting again, giving them something that they probably would never be able to do. The best thing that I had, last Friday I had a group of 14 kids through our NWTF chapter, our National Wild Turkey Federation chapter down by Rochester. They took 14 disabled and sick kids turkey hunting. They do this, the families are not out anything. This is all given to them by the National Wild Turkey Federation. And then we also kick in money. We donate their clothing that they want, their licenses, we buy them for them. So their families aren't out any money. So that's one way here in the Owatonna store that we help out. And with the outdoor fund, they can apply quarterly on that. And then it goes to a larger group, and then they in turn send out the money or grant the money to them. We just started one, it's our Outdoor Fund Scout Program. And what that will allow is scout programs, Girl Scout, Boy Scouts. They have one that is called American Heritage Girls. I had never heard of that one until the outdoor program, scout program, and then Trail Life USA. And what that will allow is groups or the troops can, if they can apply up to $2,000, they would be granted based on their size of their troop. And we just awarded a group from Janesville some camping articles for their troop, big tent, all their cooking gear. So that's one thing that we're doing as well. In June, we will be doing the State High School Trap League. We'll be hosting, or we'll be one of the vendors that will be up there. And that's 9,000 kids over a 9-day period shooting clay targets. All over the state. I know a lot of the kids around here. And we're also, so if the kids come into the store and they are on the trap program, we do give them a discount on their clothes that they use for trap, their shells, anything like that. I was up there last year when they had about 8,000 kids. And that was in an 8-day period. Not one accident. Everybody was very respectful. These kids are amazing when they shoot. And it's nice to be affiliated with that. And that is on a corporate-wide sponsorship on that one. So that, like I said, that's just kind of some of the things that I do. And there's more. And I do have some coupons and business cards on the back. Feel free to take one. Also, I did leave a card for sponsorships and donations. So if you have a group that participates in outdoor programs, feel free to take one of those cards. It does have to be 60 days in advance. So if you have any other questions, I've got my business card in that. Again, there's more sandwiches, so help yourself. And thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks again, Chris. Today, our topic for our education piece is going to be blending generations in the workforce. Did you know that right now there are 4 generations in the workplace and 5 generations of customers at your place of business? This session will give you a brief overview of each generation and the strengths that they bring to your workplace. I'd now like to introduce our speaker. Becky Tyndall is a supervisor at Federated Insurance. You may have heard of it. And if not, it is Minnesota's best kept secret. So, yep. She facilitates classes on generational differences in the Federated Learning Center and speaks at conferences on this timely topic. So please join me in welcoming Becky.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is just a pleasure to be here. This is my mic, so I'm used to wandering around a room and I have to kind of be tethered to this mic. Again, my name is Becky Tyndall, and I have some information at each of your places that I've compiled from various resources. I teach this at, I started out teaching this at churches because churches have been going through a really big transition with the younger generation bringing music into the churches that maybe the older generation didn't appreciate. And Federated heard about it, and they had me train for some generational courses that I teach all over the country for Federated. And I speak on this at conferences, so I was really pleased to be asked. One of the reasons I have this interest in the generations is because I grew up in a multi-generational household. How many of you have heard of the Pennsylvania Dutch? Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I'm Pennsylvania Dutch. And I grew up in a household where 3 families lived together, 3 generations lived together. That was normal to me. So when I got married and married this guy who had never lived with grandparents and multi-generationals, we had to kind of adjust because I was always used to multi-generations. And then when I started working on my college degree in psychology and counseling and came across this information, it was fascinating to me. These 4 generations are very unique, and there is, sociologists tell us that there's basically 4 generations that just keep repeating throughout United States history. So if you look at this handout on understanding the generations, we're just going to kind of look at an overview of each generation and talk about their strengths. And you see it says traditionalist, baby boomer, Gen X, and millennials, but then under that topic, you see where it says adaptive generation, ideological generation, reactive, and civic generations. So those are the generational types that have repeated throughout United States history. So these characteristics are kind of repetitive, and it's kind of interesting because you can look and go, so what will my grandchildren be like someday? So you can have a little fun thinking about that. Let's start with traditionalists. I want you to understand first that the birth years that I have for traditionalists, especially 1925 to 1945, these are all wavy lines. A lot of different authors use different dates. So we'll just say born before the end of World War II. Do we have any here today? I didn't spot anybody that I might say was from that generation. One of the things that is important to know is that living in a small Minnesota town in the Midwest, you have the traditionalist influence on other younger generations. I supervise a department at Federated, and I have 3 actual birth year generations in my department, but I have a lot of traditionalist influence on my baby boomers. You can see that the influences are from their coming of age years, which would be about the late 30s to the 1940s. So some of their influences would be World War II, the bombing of Pearl Harbor, women working in factories. What is that they would call women? Who remembers? Rosie the Riveter. So you remember those posters that came out with a woman showing her muscle. She could work in the factory. This was really the first time in history that we had women working outside the home because the men were all at war. And then Black Friday and the Depression. I have something here that we can pass around if you'd like to take a look at it. Those are ration coupons that belong to my great-grandmother. Each coupon is for 10 pounds of sugar. So this is a generation that went through rationing. They went through the banks, big crash. It's a Wonderful Life. What happened in the movie It's a Wonderful Life? There's a rush on the bank. Remember that scene where everybody said, well, I have $200 in the bank, but I'll take 20. So they were willing to take basically kind of like 10 cents, 20 cents on the dollar just because they didn't want to lose everything. So it really made a big impact on this generation. Their heroes were military heroes. We don't see that too much in younger generations. The generals and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that was a very high value to them, these military heroes. They were very family-centered. A lot of their activities revolved around church, the strawberry socials. What are some of the other things that churches have, maybe even have today? Anybody think of any? Might be family-centered, that everybody comes to. There used to be something called Rally Day. Have you ever had Rally Day here in the Midwest? I grew up in Philadelphia, so some of the things that I might have experienced might have been different here. So their characteristics made them very frugal, and they're savers. They save everything. So what are some of the things you might have found in your parents' or grandparents' home that they've saved?
4 kernels of corn in a Tupperware dish.
4 kernels of corn in a Tupperware dish.
Pencils, rubber bands.
Rubber bands, pencils, anything and everything. Cool Whip containers, peanut butter jars, mayonnaise jars, because you never know when you're going to need it, right? So you don't throw it out. My mother was a seamstress, and I cleaned out her bedroom last year when I was out in Philadelphia, and she had a big pile of fabric that was strips she cut off of dresses when she was hemming dresses. I'm like, Mom, you got to throw these out. Well, you never know when you need a little patch. So, she has Alzheimer's now, and I'm able to throw things out without her knowing about it. So one of the benefits of Alzheimer's, maybe. But they're very loyal to their employers, and that would be because they were really glad to have a job. During the Depression, it wasn't easy to have a job or keep a job, so they're very loyal to employers. You could even say that 100% of this generation would stay in a job they hate just because they're glad to have a job. Prefer written and face-to-face communication. Party lines. Did any of you ever experience a party line? Yeah, as a child. Knowing which ring was yours, but you could pick it up and listen and get it was early Facebook, wasn't it? You could get all the neighborhood gossip through the party line. So yeah, very early Facebook. And their entertainment, big bands, radio. If you have a family member from this generation and you ask them what they remember about the day Pearl Harbor was bombed, they will have very specific memories of that date. They probably heard about it on the radio. So it's a really interesting question to ask at family gatherings. Some of their strengths, what do you think? Tell me what you think some of their strengths might be. What do they bring to the workplace? Hard workers, work ethic, loyalty, and I left space for you to write that down. What about their abilities with money? Yeah, just their ability to work with finances. What was that? Experience. And ask them their stories. One of the things I've learned about millennials is that they love to hear the stories of the older generations, especially before we lose that generation. You know, we need to get them to share their stories with the younger generation. Finances, they're really, really strong with finances. All right, I'm going to keep moving. I'm going to move to baby boomers born approximately 1946 to 64. And again, those lines are a little wavy. This is an ideological generation. Now, in that 4-generational cycle, it always starts with an ideological generation. So a generation that brings great upheaval, big change. So in here, I have some of the things that changed. Women's rights, civil rights, big, big changes. It's a generation that is very ideological. Now, you skip forward, and we have the 4th generation is coming up next. Again, we're going to have another ideological generation. I may not live long enough to see it, but when that generation comes of age, we're going to probably see some big changes, and my guesses is that it's going to be in the area of our environment and maybe energy sources. You know, some of you who are a lot younger than me, hopefully you'll remember this and you'll go, oh, we have another ideological generation that is bringing some really big change to the world. Well, the changes that the baby boomers brought were just those big things. Civil rights and women's rights are 2 big ones I think about. But we also have to think about hippies. How many of you are from this generation? I should ask that. Do I have any baby boomers here? Got a couple. Okay. All right. Truth be told, were you hippies? Would you could have categorized yourself as a hippie? No.
I was right on the border.
Right on the border? How about you, sir?
Yep, me too, I just got in.
Just got in, so you're just on the border. I was kind of mid-boomer age, you know, had the long straight hair. I couldn't, because I was Pennsylvania Dutch, my dad would not let me dress like those hippies, but I could put the clothing in my school bag and change when I got to school. So I definitely did that. Don't tell my dad. But another big influence is those assassinations, because we had Kennedy, Robert, John F. Kennedy, who else? Martin Luther King. 3 really big changes. And if you ask somebody from this generation, and you two may be a little young for that, what they remember about that, they will have very specific memories of the day that President Kennedy was shot. So ask somebody from this generation what they remember. You might find out some things that you will be amazed at, especially that they would remember that, but not anything the day before or the day after that day. Watergate had somewhat of an influence on this generation and on Gen X as well. But we had a moon landing, Apollo 13. My goodness, the big things that happened in this generation's coming of age years. Some of the interesting things for women in this generation were not only women's rights. You've heard the phrase the glass ceiling. Have you heard that phrase? Where women were pushing on that glass ceiling, trying to get up into upper management. When I first came to Federated, we had this annual meeting where all the big higher ups are sitting on the stage and the employees can ask them questions. And when I started at Federated, I was struck with the fact that they were all men. I'm like, wow, that's interesting. There isn't one woman up there in top management at Federated. About 5, 6 years later, you see 1, sometimes 2. So things are changing, and that's an important thing because 51% of our population is women, and if we don't have women in those leadership roles, we're losing a lot of leadership experience. Higher education for men and women. The boomer generation is the first generation that had government loans for women to go to college. Do you ever know that? Previous generations, if the women wanted to go to college, they either had to be personally wealthy or they had to somehow work their own way to get through college, but you'd see a lot of teachers, nurses, What were some other professions you might have seen? Maybe working in an office? Yeah, you didn't see too many other professions with women. So baby boomer women had to really create a lot of change. And now with our money, now we have banks, people are trusting banks again, we have checking accounts, but in the coming of age years of boomers, we do not yet have credit cards. Baby boomers, their characteristics, they're known as workaholics, which I always think is really interesting because they start out as these hippies, you know, and you hear about free love and LSD, but as they come of age and they come into the workplace, they become these workaholics. So it's kind of interesting, the shift, and you often see that in generations where, you know, when they're coming of age, they're quite different from when they're actually in the workplace. Divorce is more common and accepted. Now, if a traditionalist couple got divorced, maybe the children in school would be real hush-hush. They might have been kind of, you know, looked at as, oh, you're from a divorced family. And they might not have wanted to talk about it, but big shift in that too. With the baby boomer generation, divorce is more common, it's accepted. People live in the suburbs and commute to work as opposed to the traditionalist generation where they probably lived on the farm and everybody did chores together and worked together. A little bit of trivia, we have rotary phones now. Remember rotary phones? You see them where? Antique shops and museums. Yeah. You still see them now and then in some of these catalogs for baby boomers who want nostalgia. You know, you
My
can.
grandpa actually has one.
You have one?
My grandpa does.
Your grandpa still has a rotary phone. Rock and roll, of course, we could name the Beatles and all the other, you know, rock and roll artists. Elvis, we can't miss Elvis. That were the coming of age years of baby boomers. And then early computers. When I was a senior in high school, I had a class in computer programming. But if you have two of these tables together, like we have right here, that was how big the computer was. And we used these punch cards where we punched in, yeah, I got a nod here. Somebody remembers the key punch cards, and a job that a lot of people had was key punch operator. I was one at one time. So you would create a program with these cards and load the cards in, and they go through the machine. And something that we could do in split seconds today would probably have taken hours to do then. So what do you suppose some of their strengths are? Thinking about this generation. What do they bring to the workplace? Maybe networking is one that I often think of with this generation. As they came into their working years, they really became good networkers. I have team members who will come to me and say, you know, Becky, I'd like to do this. And I'm like, oh, here's the name of somebody who will help you with that. You know, who do we access when we want to know somebody who knows somebody? It's often a boomer generation. They're really good networkers. And they carry over from the previous generation their work ethic. So you really get a lot of, that's one of their strengths is their work ethic. And almost to a fault sometimes, because they will work 60 hours a week and think nothing of it and possibly neglect their families in the, you know, as part of that, which will take us to Gen X in just a minute, but also leadership. You know, I think leadership is another strength of the baby boomer generation. And an interesting statistic is that 84% of the boomer generation would work in a job they hate because they're glad to have a job. Still quite high. And that changes quite a bit when you go into the Gen X generation. And you notice for Gen X, I have the years as 1961 to 81, but boomers I have through 64. So again, very wavy line because different resources will use different years. So raise your hand if you were born between the years of 60, let's go with 62 to 81. I thought that was the majority of this group. How many of you have your own business? Almost the same number. Do you know that your group is characterized as being entrepreneurial loners? A lot of the things with Enron, Watergate, a lot of the things that happened in corporate America, impacted your generation in such a way that you said, I just want to work for myself and start your own businesses. So I suspected when I came to this gathering, I'd see a lot of Gen X who have started their own businesses. They're also called the reactive generation. And they're called that because they react to the ideology of the boomers. The boomers and their work ethic that will cause them to neglect their families and work, the Gen X generation rejected that, and they reacted to that. How many of you were latchkey kids? Okay? You know what I mean when I say a latchkey kid? What do I mean?
You went home with no parent.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
After school.
You remember that? How'd you get in the house? It was unlocked? Houses were unlocked? Yeah. Yep. I had neighbors who were 4 sisters, and when they went home, they had to keep the shades down and sit on the sofa and keep the door locked until their parents got home. Of course, I grew up in Philadelphia. So, they weren't allowed to let anybody know they were home alone until mom and dad got home. And they'd sit there for, maybe doing their homework or something for an hour or two until mom or dad got home. So, latchkey kids. And if you look down here under trivia, it says they're the abused, alienated, and forgotten generation. Raise your hand again if you're a Gen Xer. Okay, look around, keep them up. If you're sitting next to one of them, give them a pat on the back because they need a pat on the back. There you go. High five, pat on the back, maybe even a hug. They might even need a hug because they're the alienated, abused, and forgotten generation, overshadowed by their boomer generation. And I want to give you some good live time today. So some of the things that influenced your generation, every generation has its war. World War II, Vietnam War, and now we have the Gulf War for this generation. Iran, big impact on this generation, what was happening in that area of the country, and a recession, the gas shortages. And if you remember sitting in line at a gas station for gas, yeah, and the gas prices went up. And did you ever go to a gas station that ran out of gas? Yeah, that happened. I know it happened in Philadelphia where I was living. You get there and wait in line for a long time and may not be any gas by the time you get there. So, just not a fun time to grow up. High interest rates. Tell me the highest interest rate. Anybody over 13% for a mortgage?
Oh, my parents.
Your parents? What was
Yeah,
that?
They were at 24%.
24%. 18. Unheard of today. What is it right now? Anybody know about?
About 4.25.
A little over 4%. And that's even high for right now, isn't it? I mean, it's gone up from what it was. So, think about 18%. We got an FHA when we moved to Owatonna in 1986 at 13%. And that was high. So, this generation did not have an easy start. They needed a dual income. So now we have a generation where mom and dad are probably both working, and we have credit cards. So this is a generation that did not have parents at home teaching them very much, so they ran up credit card debt. A lot of Gen Xers ended up with trouble with credit card debt. Not at all unusual for your generation because you didn't often have parents who taught you how to use money. Had personal computers, internet, cable TV, and I always like to throw this in there. First generation to have nudity on TV. I always think that's kind of a funny statistic to throw in there. When you think about the old TV shows, Leave It to Beaver, what was the bedroom like? Twin beds, yeah, with a nightstand between them too. And they came home and mom had on pearls and a dress and high heels. And then all of a sudden we have a generation where there's nudity on TV and it's so different. And this is your coming of age years when you're experiencing this. So their characteristics, again, entrepreneurial loners. So again, you say, I'm going to just start my own business. I often think of Doug Voss. Does any of you know Doug? Doug was athletic. My son worked for him when he was in high school and college. Athletic, he took that skill that he had, that love of his of athletics, and he made Fame Awards out of it. I think that's really cool. You know, you take something you know, something you're experienced with, and, you know, we have so many things. Pampered Chef. What are some of the other home businesses we have now? There's a lot of them. Can you think of any? Scentsy, that's a recent one.
Lululemon.
What's that, jewelry?
No, it's a clothing line. It's a Facebook clothing line. My daughter just started. Yeah.
So clothing, we have all these businesses, and a lot of them were started by the Generation X. By the way, you know why they're called Generation X? Did you ever wonder that? Because they're this nondescript generation in the shadow of the baby boomers. They never even got their own name. So, you know, we call them Gen X because we couldn't think of any other name for them. So I have a lot of respect for Generation X. You had a raw deal when you were growing up, yes. We're getting, okay, I'm going to move on to their strengths, problem solving, and a can-do spirit. They had kind of a raw deal. So they took that and they made it into a strength. My best problem solvers in my department are Gen X, and that is your strength, problem solving and just that positive can-do spirit. So millennials, and I gave you a handout on millennials, they are the most talked about generation in history, most written about. Everybody's heard about millennials. They started out being called Gen Y, and then it changed to millennials because their coming of age years crossed over into the 2000s. Civic generation is their name in the 4-generational cycle because they really care about cleaning things up, making the world a better place. Their influence is 911, you know, that big event that we all thought we hired a lot of programmers at Federated because we wanted to make sure everything ran the next day after 911. It became this big non-event. Terrorism and school shootings. Whoever thought that an Amish school would have somebody come in and shoot all these women and the teacher, all these little girls? You know, these are some big events that influence this generation. So safety is important. When I came in here today, I think I have it back there, I have a badge for Federated with a chip in it. So I get into the door at Federated by flashing my badge across that little scanner. Safety is important. Car seats. You know, my generation raised kids, we didn't necessarily have car seats for our kids, we held them on our lap. But safety is important to this generation. Stock market boom, then bust, and global economy is a big influence. How many of you have a passport? How many of you, keep your hands up, are a millennial? Okay, a lot of millennials have passports, a lot more than any other generation, because a lot of you did trips as maybe a high school student. You know, you had a lot of worldwide influence. You have a phone and an iPad that gives you instant information from anywhere around the world at any time. And the wars that this generation experienced, you watched happen as they happened. Your characteristics: international travel is common, credit is the norm, you know, you swipe. Diversity is the norm. Now, flip back to the traditionalist generation, and what did they do with the Japanese during World War II? They put them in internment camps. So now you come forward to the millennial generation and cross through the boomers and the Gen Xers, and diversity is normal. It's very accepted. Diversity is very common, 60% white. But some of their biggest concerns are the environment, their food, GMO. Heard of GMO? I have a daughter who's a vegetarian, had to learn what a vegan is so that I could have her friends over to my house and know what to feed them. But they're very team-oriented. They're criticized as lacking face-to-face communication skills because they do a lot of this. So when they come into the workplace, that is one of the development areas, is often to help them with their written communication, their emailing, and their face-to-face communication. Some trivia: a lot of less traditional families, might be a stay-at-home dad or a stay-at-home mom. Very child-centered. You've heard the term helicopter parents, hovering over their children. And their strengths: teamwork and technical skills. Big strengths for this generation. Now, I want to just give you a couple resources to take away. Do I have time for questions then, too?
A couple minutes.
Okay. The name Simon Sinek. Any of you familiar with Simon Sinek? Okay. Sinek. Listen to anything he has online. Just Google Simon Sinek, you'll get a ton. You can learn a lot about millennials from Simon Sinek. I have 2 books here I brought with me. Millennials at Work, the ampersand at work. I use this book in book studies with my millennials at work. We do lunch book studies. Great book for teaching millennials how to be professional in the workplace. Millennials at Work. And then this book, this is Franklin Covey puts this out, Sticking Points. Great book for learning about all the generations and then learning about sticking points or points of friction between the generations and how to find resolutions. So I don't have time to go into that today, but this book is a great resource, Sticking Points. The author is Hayden Shaw, S-H-A-W. Use this handout, 11 tips for managing millennials. There's like 4 tips and then 11 tips. I just threw a lot of resources together to give you a takeaway with this. Very quickly, we have another generation. They're your customers. They're being called Gen Z, the digital generation, Gen I for iPhones and iPads. They haven't settled in on a real firm name yet, so it's going to be interesting to see where that settles, but they're the young employees who are working summer jobs. The oldest ones are about 16, so they're starting to come into the workplace. I threw a lot of information at you, and I want to give you just a few minutes for questions. I supervise a department with multiple generations. What questions do you have? What are some issues you might be dealing with? Well, I'll hang around for a few minutes. Oh, go ahead.
I've got one.
All right.
I'm not the greatest as far as general managers go. I had the idea, but I can't handle the staffing needs for the younger folks in the millennial groups. I'm just on the edge of it. I was born in '82.
Okay.
But these are people I know that are 10 years younger than me. You say teamwork is their strategy, but their strength working independently seems to be a real issue.
Yeah.
When I give somebody a task to do and I expect it to get done, I'm too busy doing other things. I come back a few hours later and it hasn't gotten done because they needed more feedback from me and I wasn't there.
That's the key word. They love feedback. And whether you schedule your time so you can stop in a couple times a day and check in with them, they need feedback. The millennials that I'm hiring, I meet with them weekly at least. I stop by and chat with them daily. How are you doing? How did that project go that you were doing with your daughter last night? I try to check in with them a lot, and they thrive off of that because what did they grow up in? With schools where everybody did a good job, everybody gets a high five, everybody gets a sticker, everybody's a winner, everybody gets a trophy. They're used to constant feedback and constant input into their lives. So you brought up a really good point.
The participation generation, that's what my dad calls it.
Yeah.
Everybody got a participation trophy whether they did well or not.
Yep. Something interesting that I'm hearing is that's changing. We learned off of that generation that probably wasn't a good idea. So that will probably change in the next generation. All right. Well, I'll stick around if you have any other questions. I'm glad to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Rebecca.